Welcome to Synced on Air. I'm your host, Angelique Robb, and today I have Mark Woolbright for his second go on our podcast. Welcome, Mark.
Yay. Thanks for
Yay!
having me.
You're welcome. Mark was starting to say all kind of good stuff, and I was like, no, we've got to start recording.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Mark, tell us. So you were first on one of our first podcasts, really, and you were talking about the history of your inventions, really,
Yeah. Yeah.
for living retaining walls.
Right.
One of my favorite topics. I'm really excited to have you back on because that was probably 2 years ago, wasn't it?
It was 2 years ago. I was looking at that just the other day. And it was a good interview. I mean, you teased a lot of good information out of me about my long history doing this. I mean, like you, we all have a why, and I've been using my why, to power my daily activities and my perseverance for this market for a long, long time. And it hasn't changed. It's not going to change. I mean, I fell in love with plantable retaining walls, when I was backpacking in Europe after college. I just thought it was the coolest thing. I mean, why have a grade change, that's just separated with concrete, or stone or something hard, even though they can be really good looking. I just thought, wow, it's an opportunity to grow if you can get some soil in the face of that. And I just get super jazzed up when I see a wall that's planted well and grown over. I just drove past a hospital complex here in the St. Louis area last week. And throughout their campus, they've built over the years, many of our living retaining walls. And some of them are just so stunning. It's just incredible. I love walking around the campus and checking it out. And I realized that this one's been in since like, I don't know, 2001, 2002, something
Wow.
like that. And totally covered with plants. If you didn't know there was some blocks in there, you
Yeah.
would have no idea what it was. How'd they do that? So they can be good, and they do get me jazzed up. Of course, they're habitat, green space, urban cooling,
Yeah.
runoff water, filtration, infiltration. There's just, so much that they provide compared to a solid concrete wall. And again, solid concrete walls aren't going away, and there's plenty of
Exactly.
need for them. This is just an option that's maybe more environmentally sensitive, and I do get super jazzed up about it.
Well, and you touched on one thing that I think is a change from your concrete system to what you build now, which is the plastic blocks that you can fit, 250 square feet on a pallet. I mean,
Yeah,
really portable.
yeah,
Not only that, but it's these big concrete walls take a really deep foundation, strong foundation.
they
So
can.
you're removing soil, and then the concrete blocks are usually impermeable, so they can be strong and need like it stops water flow, and you need heavy duty drainage to take the water from the wall. Like it's not the wall themselves, but the wall requires all this other engineering, construction, and it affects the water flow. It affects, you could make areas more damp after construction than they were before. You could have, really dry areas at the bottom of the wall. I feel like that's something that it's more in keeping with nature if we do more plantable walls. But then, like you said, all those other benefits.
Well, this is the current business came out of just, a lifetime of observations. When we were making the concrete versions of these, plantable retaining walls, we were primarily getting a lot of sales volume with commercial construction. So, the development of office buildings, shopping centers, hospital complexes. And sometimes we would get the work because we were very structural, because our walls have a little bit of batter. They're not straight up and down. They're
Okay.
tilted 20 degrees of batter. So they're almost a slope, really. And so those become more economical to engineer and to build in a lot of cases. So we did really well competing on price, let's say. But the hurdle we always had was that people would say, well, we really want the living wall, and we want all the benefits of the plants and the environmental service. but we're really concerned about downrange maintenance and, how's it going to look, 5 years down the road? What's it going to cost us to make it look good? And so that became a limiter in some cases, because, some people, they just have their thought process and you can't sway them off that. What we had to do is we had to get really good with plant selection so that we could help
Okay.
commercial clients plant the walls with something that was going to be low maintenance or even no maintenance in many cases, that would grow in quick, cover the wall, and then have long lifespan and longevity. And of course, that shrunk the plant palette down, from 9,000 plants to maybe 10 species, that were really good all the time. But where we saw the most beauty and the most variety was when we ended up selling in the landscape environment, either for do-it-yourself projects or smaller walls that landscapers were building. And
Okay.
they would open up the plant palette. They would come up with, niftier looking designs. They would curve them on purpose, terrace them and do different things. So you saw more creativity on the landscape side. And then you get to see the real experience from the end user. If a homeowner has one of these walls and they get jazzed up about it, they want to send you pictures. They want you to come and look at, I mean, they're just great. And each one is totally unique and different. The commercial world, once it's built, everybody goes on about their life and it's just going to sit there.
Hmm.
Experientially, I got to have more fun with the end user and the landscaper, really, than I did
Okay.
with the commercial construction. But then to go further, when I was making these out of concrete, you had a centralized factory and you could only ship so far out of there because concrete's heavy. It takes up a lot of space, a lot of trucks, a lot of trucking cost, and therefore fossil fuel use too for the fuel. So with the plastic, and we focus on using reprocessed plastic as much as we can. They're not 100% reprocessed, but it depends on availability. But in any case, with the plastic, we were able to make the system more portable. So we can ship them all over the country. We've shipped them to other countries from here because they nest on a pallet or they nest in a cardboard box. And so it just gave us much more reach. And consequently, we end up having customers that are landscape contractors and homeowners. And the homeowners, they want to build their own wall. Maybe they want to build a plantable retaining wall. And so that's a reason to select this. But maybe they have no access. Their houses are close to their neighbor and they can't get equipment between the house, but they've got a slope in the back. And so their problem is weight and space. How do you get a block system into the backyard? How do you handle a heavy block? So they'll
Yes.
select our system simply because it's so portable.
Yeah.
And so there's a twofold reason why people buy either the weight or the plantability or both. But we currently don't chase a lot of commercial projects for that reason. I mean, we've
Hmm.
kind of dialed down the block to a size and a shipability that can hit, landscape contractors anywhere in the country. And so that's where our focus is now.
Well, and we just recently did a project with Five Tracks and No Longer Bound, where they bought some of your blocks. And I was on site, and they were like, "Where are the blocks? Where are the blocks?" And I was like, "They're just there."
Yeah.
I'm like, "What?
Yeah. That
Be all of them?"
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one pallet of our blocks would be a full semi load of regular concrete blocks. So it makes things pretty simple, and
Yeah.
nobody's, from a liability standpoint, nobody's gonna, smash their finger. Nobody's gonna break their toe. They're just, it takes a lot of those labor issues out. There's never been a laborer that didn't mind lifting a 3-pound block as opposed to a 80-pound block, you know? So you can go all day long with the 3-pounders as opposed to the 80-pounders.
Well, but it probably does is probably a bit weird to build with blocks and then to use these and go, "Ooh, this is very feels very different." I had somebody describe it as like a a more 3D version of a geogrid, you know?
Yeah. Somewhat, I'll tell you, we just created different hurdles, so somebody decides they want to have one of our walls, a plantable retaining wall, and maybe they don't want to do it themselves. So they say, well, do you have any installers in our area? And maybe they're in Poughkeepsie, New York, and I don't know any installers in Poughkeepsie, New York, and so then it becomes a challenge because they might say, well, we've worked with these two installers before, and I'll talk to them and they'll say, oh man, we don't know about that. We know how to install regular block. And the challenge is for me to get them to be open-minded enough to understand that this works exactly like an install of a concrete block with just a few minor exceptions. Because it's lightweight, you have to be kind of careful how you're placing your base. You can't beat on it like they do with a dead blow mallet, to get the base course level, You have to have a more fine graded leveling pad so that you can move the blocks around and get them in position and lightly tap them to the right elevation and get the base course level. And so they maybe have a little bit of extra effort with that, but of course, if they built one, they'd get good at it really quick. And you don't have the weight issue. Like when you're in a base course trench and you're a couple of feet down and you're trying to put an 80-pound block in there, you're kind of standing on your head, trying to get that thing level and wrestle it around. And so that in itself is a problem where you don't have that with our block. So there's some little trade-offs there, and then, of course, it's really easy to stack and backfill because these things just don't weigh anything. So
Yeah.
our job, well, 30 years ago, it was education on how you build a plantable retaining wall. And today it's still the same thing. It's education, education.
Mhm.
And because we're dealing with people that truly do want a plantable retaining wall with our new block, we get to have some fun with people about their plant selection and their soil selection for the backfill, what it's going to look like when it's done. And that's fun for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And you're more focused on the plantable wall blocks. I think you had living wall systems previously too, but you're focused more on the wall blocks now, is that right?
Yeah. My deep history is in, plantable retaining wall blocks, and retaining wall systems. But because I was really good and had a passion for, plantable architecture systems, let's say, we had an outgrowth and it created some patents for a vertical gardening system. So to make living walls or vertical gardens in a variety of settings, inside of a building, outside of a building. And I was fired up about that. I still am fired up about that. But my website and my front face to the world had a mixture of those things and then the retaining wall block. And the two didn't always coexist together. If you found us because you were searching retaining wall block and my homepage shows vertical gardens, it's a bit confusing to people, and vice versa. And so we really made a tough decision and decided that, we would maintain all of our rights in the vertical growing system, but we felt like we needed a partner or a licensee that was better positioned to do a good job with that. And
Right.
so just recently we've made that type of deal with a company called Bootstrap Farmer. And Bootstrap Farmer is heavy into the gardening space, the small greenhouse space, the market farmers, the flower growers, that type of thing.
Perfect.
And they supply all kinds of parts and pieces and components and some of their design, some that they acquire from others. And so we give them an extra niche. So now they can expand and market into the vertical gardening niche and the living wall niche. But their staff is really good at supporting that and their marketing's good at supporting that. And they're a much larger company than what we are. So I'm very optimistic about that. But then what it does for us is it's letting me retool my website to make it more focused on the retaining wall block
Yes.
and more focused for search engine optimization. So for people to find us. And then, we're not getting rid of our information about the vertical growing systems. We just push them to the Bootstrap Farmer site for more information and for purchase and fulfillment. But now what I'm working on is reordering the website, adding much more content about the plantable retaining wall block, and then adding additional services like plants that we can deliver as well that would be appropriate to plant in the living retaining wall, accessories for the living retaining wall, and a whole lot more content about how you plant it and how you make a plant selection, more deep dives on installation and more case studies. And so now I don't have to split my allegiance and bounce back and forth between the two, you know? And I think it's good for the customer too to see that we're going this way, you know? We're not divided. So I still have passions for both, but I had to choose. And we've chosen where I've had my deep history, and that's the retaining wall system.
Well, and it's interesting when we were building for No Longer Bound, one of the main contractors that was kind of leading the install had just recently used the concrete plantable system. And so he was like, "Oh no, I got this." Yeah, it is a little bit different, but I understand it, and like was running with it. So I
Well,
do think that it ties in really well. Like the retaining wall work is very different from a living wall. Living walls are normally, on the side of buildings or, you in your patio. Like it's more of a, grow your own vegetables maybe or herbs and retaining wall systems are in the design and build world of the landscape.
you
Yeah,
know, a big difference for me anyway, and I think for the end user, is that our concrete plantable block systems, they have a fill holding pocket. And, we tried to make the pocket as large as possible because the more soil you have in there, the better it's going to
better.
be for the plant, because concrete can heat up and compete for
And dry
moisture.
out.
Right. And dry out, and it'll compete with the plants for the moisture. And also the roots have to go out the back of the concrete system to get deeper, because the pocket in the concrete system is only so deep,
So they can't go sideways. Like,
Right.
okay.
And in a lot of traditional retaining wall construction, you put a clean rock drain column right behind the blocks. And that's what contractors are used to. And it's hard to get that changed. So you ended up creating conditions that weren't always ideal for every species of plant that the designer might want to put in that. Well, with the plastic block, it's nearly 100% soil or
Mm,
compost or, whatever kind of growable fill you put in there because there's hardly any structural element to it. And we've got an open cell bottom. So if you fill it properly on each course, you've got continuous soil. And so when you plant in the pocket, the roots can go through the sides of the block, through the
up
bottom of the
and
block,
yeah.
out the back of the block, and you have a much larger volume of soil. In fact, like I had a landscape contractor ask me this the other day. He said, well, I've got 500 square feet of wall to build. So how do I estimate how much soil goes in this? And I said, well, you have 1 cubic foot of soil for every square foot of wall face. And the guy looked at me really funny. And I'm like, yeah, it's basically 100% soil,
Yeah.
you know, the block is just the form for laying the whole thing out and compacting and holding it from erosion. Essentially, it's all soil.
Yeah.
So that's better for plant culture and it opens up the plant palette. And I would say I would slant more towards deeper rooted plants because that stitches it all together and makes it even more structural.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Oh,
those are
that's great. I
some of the
love the
big differences.
changes that you're making to the website because I think it is, we got some from you for our backyard and it's been a learning curve. And I think that that's what I like to do when I try something out is I like to build with it. Like I see the potential that it opens up on how you can design differently. But until I physically use it,
Right.
I need to do that to then understand how to design with it and what plants to use but I can't tell you how pleased I am with it because it's amazing what it's done. But I also have been, we had a terrace and I should have brought some photos. That would have been good to show. But terracing, but our plants are still growing in. So I want it to be perfect. But we took a slope and did two retaining walls, a two-tiered, so we have three levels now, and we didn't need to bring away any soil. In fact, we needed to bring in soil, and that's what surprised me about it because, but that was good because our soil isn't that great, and so I wanted to be able to improve the soil that the plants are in. So
Yeah.
it worked out really well. But we just thought, just from my regular retaining wall experience, that you would have
Right.
to bring soil off site.
Right.
And that is not the case.
Well, that's our big focus right now is to try and build a network of installers around the country. So, in every decent sized metropolitan area, there's going to be, 50 landscape contractors, and if we can just get, 2 to 5 in a given market that have installed the system and feel comfortable with it, they can do really, really well in a market with this because, it's just like anything else in the landscape world. You get good at laying pavers. And so you know what your labor rates are. You know how fast you can turn a project around, And so you need to have the same thing with the living retaining wall blocks. You need to have your labor force experienced with it. They know right what to do, how much time it's going to take for the base and to build it and what to plant in it. So over the course of the rest of this year and then all of 26, we're going to be trying to expose ourselves to landscape contractors around the country and, find a few in every market that, will work with us. And I think we'll be able to accomplish that. And maybe a year from now, we will have a much more robust business and we'll be having even more fun because it is fun. I'm maybe an oddity, I just really dig this stuff. I
I think it
always
is
have.
great.
Yeah, I get super jazzed up.
Well, I use the living retaining walls, or I should, yeah, I noticed you're saying plantable retaining walls
Right.
as an example of why we need design, construction, and horticulture, like to understand the, how to talk between the specialties and how to collaborate on projects, because your product is a great example of how you need that to be successful, but it goes through to lots of other areas like water management, which I mentioned at the start is one of the challenges of the concrete walls, is that it changes the natural water flow, and you know then you might need irrigation where you didn't need irrigation before, and you might damage mature trees, or so water management is another example of that. And yeah, I think it's a great niche. So
Early on with our plantable concrete wall system, we seemed to get a lot of tree rings in that, they would have a field that had some mature trees and they were going to put a parking lot in around, but they wanted to keep the mature trees. So they were dropping the elevation and they needed to figure out how to put a wall around the tree's root mass,
okay.
and early on, people gravitated towards us and said, well, that would be great because it's more open face. You can get air and moisture,
It's like those air
moving.
pots. it
Yeah,
it re-
exactly. Yeah, and because it's angled, you might not have to dig back for the geogrids, so you could build a
okay.
5 foot tall wall around, like out at the drip line of a big tree and go around
Yeah.
it. And you don't have to encroach inside the drip line and cut off some of the roots. And then you can still get a suitable structure that's good for the tree. So, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, oddly enough, we seem to get, 5 or 6 projects a year in the St. Louis area for just that type of application.
Wow.
So, that's the nice thing about a wall with a little bit of batter to it is your structural requirements sometimes are less. And especially if you're building in the landscape size wall, I mean, you're usually not building walls higher than 5 feet anyway, and this system's designed perfectly for that. So it just gives builders, flexibility, gives owners flexibility, um, and it's a way to add green space and habitat to a site as opposed to just stacking up more concrete.
Yeah. Well, and you can use it as it's another tool in your tool chest or toolbox, that you might have a retaining wall, but you can make that smaller. The concrete retaining wall can be smaller than and not look like you know a
Right.
swimming pool,
Yeah. Yeah.
make you feel like you're in a hole or something. So yeah, concrete wall and then do green wall on top of that, and just another aspect to vary it up.
Well, you're a great advocate for the synthesis of, hardscape and softscape and horticulture. And for our type of system, we've always had to have that synergy. And where we didn't have that synergy, we didn't always end up with a great project years down the road.
Okay.
When I talked about going by a hospital complex that had used our system in the early 2000s, drove by and I'm like, hey, there's a bunch of my old walls in there. I want to drive in and check it out. And they were stunning and they were totally plant covered and nobody would know that there was a block in there if I didn't tell them, but they're providing environmental service and longevity, and they look like the plants look, not like the concrete looks. A lot of concrete walls, they'll crack and degrade or move or settle. Maybe that's happening in our old walls too, but you would never know it because everything's covered in plants. And so that's your aesthetic. Um, those, those successful long-term projects wouldn't have been possible without a synergy between the engineer that designed the wall and then the architect that maybe broke it up into terraces or curved it or did something more interesting with it. And then the landscape architect that chose wisely for the soil in the pocket and the plants for the regionality of the wall. So they all come together, and then perhaps maintenance as well, depending on the plant species. All those have to come together and yields a great project that becomes a landmark. But if it's just somebody that wants a wall at a low price and we happen to be low on that one, maybe it's going to look good 10 years down the road. Maybe it's not, depending on
Yeah.
the other elements
If
that
you
weren't done.
haven't
Yeah.
chosen the right plants. Well, I think that that's where it's great what you're doing with the website and educating more on, the types of plants that suit the walls, but it's also going to need to change in different climates and
Yeah.
microclimates. And I mean, that's one thing that, you know, I think you learn, Louisiana is going to be different from Georgia, even though they're both in the South, like it does depend on where you are and what your native soil is. And yeah.
Your annual rainfall. I think some of our better walls had irrigation built into them.
Okay.
Maybe if not long term, for the short term. So you could get good plant establishment and you didn't have plant mortality in your initial planting. And
Okay.
then, and then the irrigation could be shut off, let's say, and the plants would go on their own if they were chosen properly for the region of the country and the light phase and all that. Yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought on that.
Well, I think
Gosh,
the improvements that you're making are gonna help people because it is a new way of thinking.
I know what I was going to say, and that's it. That like we have a huge amount. I'd say maybe 60 or 70% of our blocks ship to California,
Okay.
and and really the West Coast. I mean, I'm working with a customer this morning from Washington State, and their set of conditions are different than the people in San Diego or Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And they know what they want to plant because they're used to landscaping in those areas. I have to help them make adjustments for the plant palette that's going to go into the wall itself. But the vast majority of the walls, they don't want to add irrigation. And so you have to choose plants that are going to work well for the lack of rainfall in Southern California. And, it's like the Garden of Eden out there. I mean, they've got a huge plant palette, and I'm still learning about what to plant in California. But,
Yeah.
most part, there's no bad choices out there other than something that's going to stay small. Something that's really going to create a bigger top growth is always going to be better for our walls because it's going to cover the wall elements, the blocks themselves. And that's what people really want. They don't want to see the block. They want to see the plants.
Well, the plants are the showcase. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Like the one you did in your background there.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, what do you see for I mean, you talked a little bit about the future, that what you want to do is you want to educate and kind of train contractors in different areas to learn how to, install your blocks, and maybe design with your blocks. Are you seeing more interest in greening up walls over the past, let's say, 5 years, handful of years? And
Yeah, I think so. I mean, over the last, 35 years since I've been doing this, initially people didn't know what to think about a plantable retaining wall, and in some cases, they were scared of it or it didn't matter to them. And then, once the Green Building Council came in, the
yeah,
USGBC in 2000, I think from a design standpoint in the construction community, they started to understand that if they add plants to a site, it's a better thing.
yeah,
So we had an opening up of everybody's mind. And now, like if you do a simple Google search, like you never could search for plantable retaining wall block before because there was nothing there. Now I'd say for plantable retaining wall block on Google, I think I saw this the other day, there's like 13 or 14,000 searches a month done for that.
wow, okay,
Yeah, and that's not me driving it. That's people saying, "Hey, we've heard about these things and we'd like
yes,
to check that out." You
yeah,
know. So I think there is always been an acceptance of it, but maybe now there's more of a preference for it. Uh,
okay,
and maybe it's because people are just looking for something new and different. It's a totally different, unique aesthetic.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm a fan, and if those listeners don't know what we're talking about, we will have links in the show notes so that you can find out more about Mark's product. And yeah, I mean, you do have a lot on YouTube explaining things, but it sounds like you're going to be beefing up your website to make sure it has all that as well.
Beefing it up. You're right. Well, I recently bought a new house. We've got a bunch of kids and they all went away and are now living far and wide. And so we sold the bigger house. We bought a smaller house and this one's got a big slope in the backyard. And I can't believe I bought a house with a big slope in the backyard. In any case,
Perfect.
yeah. So it does need a wall so that we can have more functional space in the backyard. And naturally, I know a guy,
Do you? Yeah.
yeah, I know a guy that's got those. So I'm looking forward to working with the contractor on that and shooting some good video. And maybe I can make some finer points there. And it should be able to be busted up into a bunch of smaller segmented YouTubes and things that we can use on our website. And that's good because, if somebody buys the blocks in Washington State, I might get a picture afterwards because they're proud of the project, but I didn't get any, how'd they do it and, any of the build and all that. So, and I can't just drive to Washington State, let's say,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
California, or I can't drive down to Louisiana real easy either. So sometimes I am a little bit limited and, it's maybe a godsend that I got a house with a slope in the back.
I think you chose that on purpose.
My wife would
Perfect
think,
canvas.
it could be a perfect canvas. Yeah. It's challenging too because it doesn't get any sunlight back there. The way the sun tracks on this, it's a north face and it's down below the house. And so there's a lot of shade. And so it's really going to
Okay.
challenge me to find
From your
shade
plant
plants
pellet.
that for this regionality, that are going to cover that wall up. And I also don't want to irrigate it. So I'm going to need to find some shade tolerant plants that also don't need a whole lot of water and so on. So, it
Mm.
becomes a little bit of a project. It's doable. I certainly know all the people that can help me analyze it. So that part will be fun.
I look forward to that case study. We'll have to publish that.
Right. All right. Well, I'll beat you to it. If I get it done, I'm hoping to do it yet this year. So if I get it
Good.
done, it'll be out there for everybody to see as soon as I can edit the video.
Yeah. Sounds great. Well,
Well, thanks
Mark,
for having me
anything else?
on.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there anything else you want to tell our audience? Or we'll put some stuff in the show notes and, links to your website, links to your YouTube channel, and people can have a peruse of everything.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the only thing I'd say is just if you're looking for something different, a unique aesthetic in your landscape, and you're more of a plant person, and you're really interested in providing environmental service or just plant based beauty, give us a look. We're passionate about it, and we're happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you so much,
Right.
Mark. Great to see you, as
Yeah, great to
always.
see you again. Yeah, thank you. Best of luck
Thanks.
with everything you're doing. See ya.
Thanks, Mike.